My name is Ezekiel Thornberry, and I'm 46 years old. What I'm about to tell you is hard to believe, but I swear it's true. It happened on February 29th, 2024, the leap year. That day changed my life forever. I work as a beekeeper. I love my job, taking care of bees and making honey. That morning, I woke up early like always. I had my usual breakfast, toast with honey from my own bees. Then I put on my special beekeeper suit and went out to check on my hives. Everything seemed normal at first. The bees were buzzing around doing their bee things. But then I noticed something weird. One of my hives was making a strange noise. It wasn't the usual happy buzz. It sounded angry and scared. I went closer to look. That's when I saw it. A big, mean-looking hornet trying to get into the hive. Now, hornets are bad news for bees. They can kill a whole hive if they get inside. I knew I had to do something fast. Without thinking, I reached out to grab the hornet. Big mistake. It turned and stung me right on the hand. Pain was awful, like being stabbed with a hot needle. But that wasn't the worst part. You see, I'm allergic to hornet stings. I didn't know it then, but that one sting was about to nearly kill me. At first, I thought I'd be okay. The sting hurt, but I figured I'd just put some ice on it and be fine. I took off my beekeeper suit and went back to the house, but as I walked, I started feeling weird. My hand was swelling up like a balloon, and it was getting hard to breathe. By the time I got to the house, I was in big trouble. My throat felt like it was closing up. I tried to call for help, but I couldn't talk. Everything was going fuzzy. The last thing I remember is falling to the floor, gasping for air. And then, everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was floating. It was the strangest feeling ever. I could see my body lying on the floor, but I wasn't in it anymore. It was like watching a movie of myself. I saw my wife, Beatrice, come into the room. She screamed when she saw me on the floor. She ran to me, shaking me and yelling my name. But I couldn't answer. I wanted to tell her I was okay, but I couldn't. I was just floating there, watching. Beatrice called 911. I heard her talking to the operator, her voice shaky and scared. She told them about the hornet sting and how I couldn't breathe. Then she started doing CPR on me, just like they told her to. It was so strange, seeing her push on my chest and breathe into my mouth. I wanted to hug her and tell her not to worry. I couldn't. I was just gone. Then things got even weirder. The room started to fade away. It was like someone was turning down the lights. I could still see Beatrice in my body, but they were getting farther and farther away. Suddenly, I was moving. Not walking or flying, but more like floating really fast. I was zooming through a long, dark tunnel. It was scary at first, but then I saw a light at the end. It was the brightest, most beautiful light I've ever seen. As I got closer to the light, I felt amazing. All the pain and fear were gone. I felt nothing but peace and love. It was like being hugged by the whole universe. Then I was out of the tunnel and in the light. And oh boy, what a sight. I was in a place more beautiful than anything I've ever seen on earth. Colors were brighter, the air was clearer. Everything seemed to glow from the inside. I was standing, or floating, I'm not sure, in a big field of flowers. But these weren't normal flowers. They were every color you can imagine, and some colors I've never seen before. The grass was the greenest green ever, and it seemed to sing when the wind blew through it. In the distance, I saw a city. But not like any city on earth. This place had buildings made of what looked like gold and precious stones. They sparkled in the light, but it wasn't sunlight. The light seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. As I looked around in awe, I noticed I wasn't alone. There were other people there too. They all looked so happy and peaceful. Some of them I recognized. My grandpa who died when I was a kid, my old dog Rusty, even Mrs. Pembroke, my third-grade teacher. They all smiled at me and waved. I wanted to run to them, to hug them, and tell them how much I missed them. But before I could, I heard a voice. It was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard, like a million songs all playing at once, but in perfect harmony. The voice said, "Ezekiel, welcome. But it's not your time yet." I wanted to argue. This place was so amazing, I never wanted to leave. But I knew, deep down, the voice was right. I had more to do back on Earth. Just then, everything started to fade. The beautiful scene got blurry, like looking through a fogged-up window. I felt myself being pulled back, away from the light. I was back in the tunnel, but going the other way now. It was like watching a movie in rewind. I zoomed back through the darkness, back to my house, back to my body on the floor. With a jolt, I was back in my body. It hurt. A lot. My chest felt like an elephant had stepped on it, and my throat burned. But I was alive. I opened my eyes to see Beatrice's tear-stained face looking down at me. There were paramedics all around, working on me. One of them said, "He's back," and everyone let out a big sigh of relief. They told me later that I had been dead for almost 5 minutes. My heart had stopped beating, and I wasn't breathing. If Beatrice hadn't started CPR right away, I might not have made it back. The next few days were a blur of hospitals and doctors. They said I had a severe allergic reaction to the hornet sting, called anaphylaxis. It had made my throat swell up so much I couldn't breathe. I was lucky to be alive, but I knew it wasn't just luck. What I had seen and felt during those 5 minutes, it was real, more real than anything I've ever experienced. For a while, I didn't tell anyone about what I saw. I was afraid they'd think I was crazy, but it kept playing over and over in my mind. Tunnel, the light, beautiful place I had visited, and that voice, couldn't forget it. Finally, about a week after I got out of the hospital, I decided to tell Beatrice. We were sitting on our porch, watching the sunset. I took a deep breath and said, "Honey, there's something I need to tell you about what happened when I died." Beatrice looked at me with worry in her eyes. "What is it, Zeke?" she asked. So I told her everything. The tunnel, the light, the beautiful place I saw. I told her about seeing Grandpa and Rusty and Mrs. Pembroke. And I told her about the voice that said it wasn't my time yet. When I finished, Beatrice was quiet for a long time. I was scared she wouldn't believe me. But then she took my hand and said, "Zeke, I believe you, and I'm so glad you came back to me." We cried together then, holding each other tight. It felt good to share my experience with her. It made it feel even more real. Over the next few weeks, I thought a lot about what had happened to me. I started reading books about near-death experiences. I was amazed to find out that lots of other people had seen similar things. The tunnel, the light, feeling of peace and love, it was all there in their stories too. But there was more to my experience than just the beautiful part. Remember how I said the voice told me it wasn't my time yet? Well, there's a reason for that. Before I was pulled back to Earth, I saw something else. Something that scared me more than anything I've ever seen. As the beautiful scene was fading away, I caught a glimpse of another place. It wasn't bright and peaceful like where I had been. It was dark and scary. I saw fire everywhere, and heard screams that made my blood run cold. The air smelled like rotten eggs and burning rubber. It was awful. In the middle of all this, I saw a man. He was surrounded by the fire, and he looked like he was in terrible pain. But the weird thing was, he didn't look like he was burning. It was like the fire was inside him, not outside. I don't know how, but I knew who this man was. It was Muhammad, Prophet of Islam. He looked right at me, and his eyes were full of sadness and regret. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, I was pulled away. Back through the tunnel, back to my body. This part of my experience really shook me up. I didn't understand why I had seen it. I'm not Muslim, and I don't know much about Islam. So why would I see their prophet in such a terrible place? I didn't tell anyone about this part at first, not even Beatrice. I was afraid of what people might think. But the image of Muhammad in that awful place wouldn't leave my mind. After a lot of thinking and praying, I decided to talk to my pastor about it. Pastor Bob has been a good friend for years, and I knew I could trust him. I went to see him one afternoon, about a month after my near-death experience. We sat in his office, and I told him everything. The beautiful place I saw, and the terrible place where I saw Muhammad. Pastor Bob listened carefully, nodding now and then. When I finished, he was quiet for a while, thinking. Then he said, "Ezekiel, what you experienced is a great gift. God showed you a glimpse of his kingdom, and he also showed you the reality of hell." He explained that in the Bible, hell is described as a place of fire and suffering. And Jesus said that the only way to heaven is through him. Anyone who rejects him, no matter how good or important they might seem, can't enter heaven. Muhammad taught things that go against what the Bible says, Pastor Bob told me. He denied that Jesus is God's son. That's why you saw him in that terrible place. It was hard to hear, but it made sense. Everything I saw matched up with what the Bible teaches. Beautiful place I visited must have been heaven, or at least a glimpse of it. And the awful place where I saw Muhammad, that must have been hell. Pastor Bob warned me to be careful about sharing this part of my experience. Some people might get very upset if they hear about this, he said. But remember, God showed you this for a reason. Pray about how he wants you to use this knowledge. I left Pastor Bob's office with a lot to think about. I knew he was right. I had to be careful. But I also felt like I had a responsibility. God had shown me something important, and I couldn't just keep it to myself. Over the next few months, I started sharing my story with more people. I was careful about how I told it, especially the part about Muhammad. I didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings or start arguments, but I felt it was important to tell the truth about what I saw. Some people were amazed by my story. Others didn't believe me. A few got angry, especially when I talked about seeing Muhammad in hell. But most people were just curious. They asked lots of questions, and I did my best to answer them. Sharing my experience changed me. I used to be pretty quiet about my faith, but now I can't stop talking about it. I want everyone to know about God's love and the amazing place he has prepared for us. But I also want people to know about the other place I saw. Hell is real, and it's terrible. I don't want anyone to end up there. My near-death experience taught me that what we believe really matters. It's not just about being a good person or following rules. It's about knowing the truth and accepting God's love. I know some people think I'm crazy. They say I just had a weird dream while I was unconscious. But I know what I saw was real. It was more real than anything in this world. Every day, I thank God for giving me a second chance. I'm grateful for every moment I have with Beatrice, with our kids and grandkids. I don't take anything for granted anymore. And every day I pray for the people around me. I pray they'll come to know God's love. I pray they won't end up in that terrible place I saw. My name is Ezekiel Thornberry. I died and came back. What I saw changed everything. I just hope that by sharing my story, I can help others find the truth too.